Haltikan na winam. They thought they were pulling the strings trying to quietly sabotage my career without realizing the person they were targeting was the one who signed their paychecks. What began as a quiet betrayal slowly unraveled into the most satisfying power move of my life. So if you're the type who finds joy in stories of quiet revenge wrapped in success, go ahead and subscribe. Because while money can't buy peace of mind, it can absolutely bankroll the perfect revenge, especially when your own toxic family doesn't know you're sitting atop a $500 million empire. Just a few weeks ago, I got a brutal reminder of that truth. My own parents and younger brother tried to sink my career completely oblivious to the fact that they were aiming their arrows at the woman who owned the company. I'm Madeline Carter, though. In business circles, I go by Maddie. On paper, I'm the newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer at Valerix Biotech, a cutting-edge research firm based in San Diego. What my family never suspected was that 2 months earlier, I had quietly become the majority owner of the entire company, executing a discreet and calculated acquisition through a network of private trusts and holding entities. The journey to that moment had begun nearly 18 years ago, when I was a reserved, scholarship-bound engineering student, struggling through sleepless nights and double shifts at Georgia State. My brother Brandon breezed his way through Stanford, living off our parents' dime and spending summers Instagramming his European yacht parties and Tuscan wine tastings. Brandon just needs a little more guidance, Mom Carol used to say, brushing aside my fatigue with a pat on the shoulder. You've always been so self-sufficient, Maddie. But self-sufficient didn't quite capture it. I was juggling everything: biochem lab projects, freelance tutoring gigs, and back-end coding contracts just to keep my head above water. While Brandon sipped Chardonnay in Provence, I was neck-deep in protein synthesis models. Still, I kept my eye on the bigger picture. I had a vision, and I knew that if I stayed focused long enough, it would all eventually pay off. And it did. By the time I hit 30, I'd already built and sold 2 biotech startups. I kept things low-key, staying off the radar, redirecting profits through anonymous LLCs and shell firms. I let the world believe I was just another mid-level manager toiling away in a lab coat. Why all the secrecy? Because I knew firsthand how wealth had a tendency to rot relationships. My parents always lauded Brandon's stable job in corporate sales, some boring tech-adjacent gig he exaggerated at Thanksgiving while brushing off my ventures as projects or experiments. You should talk to Brandon, Mom would often suggest over bland chicken dinners. He could help you get into something real. So I played along. I let them believe I needed their guidance, that I was barely scraping by. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was engineering my boldest move, yet quietly acquiring Valorix Biotech, the very company where I'd been a senior strategist for just over a year. The company was undervalued on paper, but bursting with potential. Through a web of carefully veiled acquisitions and trusts, I secured control without anyone at the firm suspecting a thing. When the board promoted me to CSO, they thought they were bringing on a loyal, up-and-coming thinker. They didn't realize they were giving a seat to the woman who owned most of the shares. Brandon's reaction, absolutely priceless. "Must be nice to finally get a break," he said at our monthly family dinner, flashing a knowing smirk. "Hope you're not in over your head, though. Corporate leadership's a whole different beast from playing with science toys." Mom and Dad Carol and Rick shared a worried glance. "Maybe Brandon could mentor you?" Mom chimed in cheerily. "He's got years of management under his belt, sweetheart." I gave a polite nod, forcing down a laugh. If only they knew about the notarized acquisition contracts locked in the safe at my downtown loft. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, my tone as smooth as buttered glass. But Brandon wasn't satisfied with smug remarks alone. My promotion had upended the family hierarchy. He'd always been the golden boy, the dependable one with a real job, while I was just the introverted nerd they thought would eventually burn out. The first warning sign came when he started popping by Valorix for lunch, schmoozing with department heads, pretending to be the concerned brother, checking in on his overwhelmed sister. From my office window, I watched him, sunglasses on his head, laughing too loudly, and shaking hands like a politician on campaign. Then came the whispers. Anonymous emails to HR with claims that my degrees were fake, that my credentials were inflated. All nonsense, all easily disproven, but the message was clear. Someone wanted me gone. "Just looking out for you," Brandon said with that syrupy concern when I finally confronted him. "You know how it is, tech firms are so eager to tick diversity boxes these days. They push women up too fast." I'd hate to see you crash and burn in front of everyone. I let him keep talking, let him keep digging that hole deeper and deeper. I was curious how far would he go. The answer came yesterday in the form of a sealed manila envelope delivered to the board of directors. Inside a polished poisonous dossier filled with doctored bank statements, edited emails, and a damning timeline that painted me as a con artist, embezzlement, insider trading fraudulent reports. A meticulous piece of fiction. The board wasted no time in calling an emergency meeting for Friday. Word must have traveled fast, probably through Brandon's office grapevine, because at dinner that night he was practically vibrating with anticipation. The board's asked me to be present tomorrow, he said with theatrical flourish. Big changes coming, top-level restructuring. Carol and Rick beamed full of misguided pride. Neither of them asked why I hadn't been invited to this supposed leadership overhaul. But what they didn't know was that while they were sipping red wine and celebrating my assumed downfall, I was back in my office assembling my own counterattack, a detailed dossier of every manipulation, every forged document, every scheming whisper. And this time, I'd also be unveiling the true ownership of Valorix Biotech. So if you think Brandon's going to walk away unscathed, now might be the perfect time to hit that subscribe button, because what comes next? It flips the entire script. I should be livid. I should be crushed by the fact that my own brother tried to annihilate my career, that my parents RSVP'd to my professional execution like it was a garden party. But here I am, seated in my sunlit home office, surrounded by printed lies and counterfeit ledgers, and I feel strangely calm. Brandon's entire scheme, malicious as it was handed me the perfect platform, a rare golden opportunity to not only expose his betrayal, but to finally face the years of being minimized, misread, and quietly dismissed. My family would walk into that room believing they were about to witness my downfall. But what they would actually witness, what they could never have predicted, was a meticulously orchestrated unveiling, the kind that only a quiet girl who's spent a lifetime observing, enduring, calculating could deliver. They had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the one in the corner, the one who, unbeknownst to them, owned the board, the table, the game itself. That morning, I arrived at Valorix Biotech, hours before the meeting, the rising sun casting a golden sheen across the glass facade of the headquarters. My heels echoed against the marble floor of the executive wing, each step steady, each breath collected. The air was crisp with anticipation, and as I sat in my office reviewing the final copy of the dossier, I felt none of the chaos my family had tried to bring into my life. Only clarity. Only power. At precisely 8:45 a.m., Brandon Carter strode into the main lobby like he was preparing to accept an award he hadn't earned. His navy suit was tailored to perfection, and his smug grin betrayed his giddy self-congratulations. Carol and Rick followed close behind, dressed for triumph in coordinated neutrals and forced expressions of dignity. "Is the board ready for us?" Brandon asked the receptionist, his tone oily with false humility. He looked like he was back in high school, smug after sabotaging my science fair project, oblivious to the fact that this time the stakes were far more permanent. From my office on the second floor, I watched them be escorted toward the executive conference room. The directors came soon after, faces drawn and lips pursed, a somber parade, moving toward revelation. Every one of them had received my confidential message the night before. They were not arriving blind. At 9:00 a.m. sharp I stood. The chair scraped softly against the polished floor, and I smoothed my blazer, checked the flash drive in my pocket, and stepped into the corridor. The hallway stretched ahead like a theater aisle, and I walked it like a performer ready for the final act. Michael Prescott, the board chair, was already speaking when I opened the door. "The allegations against Ms. Carter are extremely serious," he began. "Apologies for being late," I said, with a bright tone that sliced through the tension, stepping into the room as though I owned it. Because I did. Brandon turned to me, his face twisting into disbelief. "Maddie, this is a closed session," he snapped, voice trembling beneath its edge. "You weren't invited." I took my seat without flinching. "Actually, I invited myself," I said, folding my hands on the table. "It's rather difficult to hold a board meeting without the company's owner." The silence was exquisite. Brandon's jaw went slack. Carol's eyes blinked in rapid confusion. Rick paled visibly, looking like someone had dropped ice down his collar. Brandon leaned forward. "What are you talking about? Valorix is owned by shareholders." It's a public company. I gave a small nod to Kayla, who stepped forward gracefully and handed out thick folders to each director. Correction, I said. Valerix was a public company until 2 months ago when it was quietly purchased by Trans Strategic Holdings. Would you like to guess who owns that? The rustle of turning pages filled the room. Gasps, murmurs, and sharp glances passed among the directors as they skimmed the documents. Recognition dawned slowly but unmistakably, like sunlight creeping across a shadowed room. "This is insane," Brandon muttered, his voice cracking. "You can't afford, you're just a lab geek, a coder." "Yes," I interrupted, gently, a smile curving my lips. "You've said that often enough." I turned once more to Kayla. "Would you play the audio, please?" She tapped her tablet. The room filled with Brandon's voice, his private digs, his whispered sabotage. Between us, he was saying in one clip, "Maddie's not really leadership material. She's smart in the lab, sure, but she'll burn out." Another recording followed. "Noticed anything off in her department's finances could be worth a second look." Each sentence, each venom-laced word he had thought lost to the air now returned in surround sound. I watched as the color drained from his face, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. "And then there's this," I said, raising the envelope he had submitted to the board. "Forged documents, fake transactions, falsified correspondence, an entire symphony of lies." I let the silence hang like a noose. Brandon's voice broke as he tried to defend himself. "I was protecting the company. You're not qualified, you don't deserve." "No," I said softly. "I deserve to expose you for corporate sabotage, for trying to manipulate the market, for endangering the integrity of this company with your lies." Carol's voice trembled into the silence. "You wouldn't ruin your brother's life over this." I turned to her, a glacial calm in my chest. "Like he didn't try to ruin mine. Like you didn't come here to watch it happen." Rick lifted a hand in weak protest. "We were just here for Brandon." "No," I cut in. "You were doing what you've always done, betting on the wrong horse." I stood and faced the board. "I apologize for the dramatics, but it was necessary. Mr. Brandon Carter has engaged in serious breaches, falsification, harassment, and espionage." Michael Prescott cleared his throat. "What do you propose we do, Miss Carter?" I sat once more, voice firm and clear. "First, I want it on record that all allegations against me are false and officially dismissed. Second, I request a formal report be sent to Brandon's employer detailing his misconduct, including audio and documentation." Brandon's voice cracked. "You'll destroy my career." "Like you tried to destroy mine," I replied, the chill in my voice unmistakable. "The difference, I have truth. You have fiction." Lastly, I continued, Brandon Carter. Carol Carter and Rick Carter are permanently banned from Valerix property. Any interference will trigger immediate legal consequences." Carol sobbed, her mascara running. "But we're family." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "Family celebrates you. Family protects you. Family doesn't conspire to see you fall." I pulled a final folder from my briefcase and slid it across the table. "This is the acquisition contract for my first biotech firm. Sold at 27 for $50 million. The second 2 years later for $180 million. I looked at Rick. "I could have bought you that golf club membership, paid for every trip you handed Brandon like candy. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I watched." Their eyes scanned the figures, numbers that obliterated every lie they had fed themselves. Because I wanted to know, I said, standing tall, who would believe in me when they thought I had nothing. They had failed that test, and now they would live with the results. Blake had gone almost spectral, the color draining from his face as he stood rooted in disbelief. "You're firing me from my job," he whispered, the question barely audible. "No," I replied, voice tempered but resolute. "Your actions fired you, just like you once tried to do to me. The only difference is you're actually guilty." I stood gathering the last of my documents from the lacquered mahogany table, each paper now a symbol of finality. "This board meeting is adjourned," I announced clearly, letting my gaze sweep the room like a closing curtain. "Marcus, please ensure all documentation is properly filed and secured." Then with deliberate calm, I turned to face the room's occupants one last time. "Blake, Mom, Dad, security will escort you out." As I reached the heavy double doors, his voice cracked behind me. "Wait, please. I'm sorry. I was jealous." He stood trembling in the sterile light, stripped of his usual arrogance. "I couldn't handle that you were finally doing better than me. We can fix this, right? We're still family." I paused, hand on the door, and turned. The tension in my chest hadn't left, it had merely settled like sediment. "Do you know the difference between us, Blake?" I asked. His eyes met mine, glossy with emotion. "When you thought I was struggling, you pressed harder, tried to bury me. When I was succeeding, I made myself smaller to keep you from feeling overshadowed. That's the difference between real success and the shallow games you play. The weeks that followed were nothing short of transformative. Blake was swiftly terminated once his employer reviewed the damning evidence of sabotage. The news of my promotion at Summit Core Technologies trickled out a ripple, becoming a wave. The same social circles that once sang hymns in Blake's honor began whispering my name with new reverence. Tear-streaked voicemails arrived from our parents. Blake sent handwritten apologies, his penmanship strained but sincere. Even his therapist reached out, explaining he was working through his issues. I archived them all without responding. The silence was deliberate. Healing sometimes meant letting absence speak for you. 3 months passed. One night, immersed in contracts and growth forecasts, my assistant Tasha buzzed through. "Someone's here to see you, says it's personal." He entered not as the brother I once knew, but as someone diminished, altered by hardship. Gone were the tailored suits and luxury watches. Blake wore a plain button down his face, thinner hair cropped short, and eyes haunted with regret. In his hands, a manila envelope. "I'm not staying," he said quickly, voice low, eyes darting. "I just need to say something." He placed the envelope on my desk like a confession laid bare. "It's all in here. Passwords, contacts, everything I uncovered while trying to destroy you. I'm also sending letters to the board and my old employer owning it all. No excuses." I studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" "Because you were right," he said, voice gravel thick with emotion. "I wasn't building anything real. You were, and I hated you for it." He turned to leave, hesitating at the door. "I'm starting over. Small startup. Entry level. No shortcuts this time. I don't expect forgiveness. But letting me fall, that taught me more than Mom and Dad ever did by catching me." "Blake," I called softly. He turned the faintest shimmer of hope in his eyes. "Send me your resume in a year," I said, meeting his gaze. "Not for a leadership role. But if you're serious about earning your way up, we always need people who are willing to build from the ground." A single tear traced down his cheek. He gave a small nod, composed himself, and left without another word. 6 months later, Summit Core Technologies had not only met projections, but shattered them. We were developing life-changing biotech innovations, creating hundreds of jobs across the Pacific Northwest. Something tangible, something enduring. Mom and Dad still reached out, usually when they needed something or when they wanted to boast about their daughter, the CEO. I responded with polite distance. The craving for their validation had long since withered away. The corner office they said I'd never earn overlooked the Seattle skyline like a quiet throne. On some evenings, I would sit by the tall glass windows watching the sun disappear behind the Cascade Mountains, reflecting on ambition, family, and the underestimated strength of silence. Then just last week, a holiday card arrived. It was from Blake. No apologies, no pleas, just a quiet note. "You succeeded not because of us, but despite us. I'm learning to do the same." Maybe that's what real revenge looks like. Not fire or fury, just undeniable peace, earned quietly, claimed without ceremony. Thank you for listening to this chapter of my story, for seeing me when so many I loved chose not to. But I don't want this space to end with just my voice. I want to hear yours. Leave a comment. Tell me, what would you have done? Stayed silent, fought back. Have you lived in shadows, building something real, while others shined in borrowed light? Let this space become more than a story. Let it be proof that you don't need applause to validate your worth. Sometimes the quiet grind, the unseen effort, that's your real legacy. And if you're still in the middle of your climb, pushing through late nights, being dismissed, underestimated, keep going. Let your success become the thunder that breaks through the silence. Like, share, and subscribe, not just to follow my journey, but to honor yours. Because in the end, success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always right to believe. So what's your story? I'm listening.